They begged me not to write this. They said what I saw was not meant for men, that some truths should remain buried, that all of heaven would tremble if they were revealed. But how could I remain silent? After seeing what I saw, after hearing what I heard, after walking between the gates of eternal fire and the halls of infinite light. My name is Enoch, and I wrote it anyway, because God spoke, and I feared silence more than judgment. Now, you will see why. But be warned, what will be revealed may change everything you understand about justice, about the fall, and about what is still to come. There were no kings in those days, no human laws, no altars built by religious hands. The earth was raw, untouched, filled with violent voices and silences more dangerous than sound. I was just a man among many, a son of Jared, a grandson from a time when men were beginning to forget God. My name was Enoch, and I didn't know that my silence, my questions, and my thirst for meaning would be noticed by heaven. I only knew that something was broken in me and around me that no human wisdom could heal. People lived bound to the ground, but my heart was always looking up. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about a void that neither work nor family nor nature could fill. I started walking alone, far from the cities, listening to the wind and hoping that someday something would answer me. It wasn't madness, it was hope. And in that constant walking, where my questions became wordless prayers, he revealed himself, not in form, but in presence. Not through rules, but through nearness. God came close to me, and I followed. In those days, walking with God was dangerous. No one talked about it. Many mocked, others feared, but there was something in his voice, even when he didn't speak, that kept me going. Sometimes it was a breath, sometimes a heavy silence that carried meaning. And in that daily walk, I began to understand that faith wasn't what I said. It was what I did when no one was watching. It was following even without the promise of reward. It was believing that the invisible could be more real than any stone beneath my feet. The Bible would later say that Enoch walked with God and was no more because God took him, Genesis 5:24. But before that, there was pain. There were moments when heaven seemed silent, when human evil made me wonder if God truly saw what we were doing with the world he had created. It was in that time that I learned something not written on scrolls, but along the path. God's silence is not absence. It is preparation. It is refinement. He wasn't absent from me. He was shaping me. When I think about it now, I think of you. Maybe you also feel far from him. Maybe your faith has turned into habit or fear. Maybe you pray and feel like you're talking to yourself. If so, know this. My story began where the faith of many ends, in loneliness, in doubt, in unanswered cries. But it was there that he called me, not with easy promises, but with an invitation. Walk with me. And believe me, that invitation still echoes generation after generation. Even now I didn't know it, but that walk would lead me to heaven. It would turn me into a messenger. It would give me visions no man had ever received. And it would place me before a choice that few ever face, to guard what I saw, or to write it down, knowing it would bring judgment, rejection, and weight. And I wrote, because I understood that my story was part of something greater, something that had to be told. And maybe, as you hear this, you'll realize, no matter how far you are, no matter how cold your heart feels, the steps back always begin with one. Yes, I still want to walk with God. I wasn't prepared. I hadn't been trained, anointed, or even instructed. I was just walking. And it was on one of those quiet, ordinary days that something happened. I didn't see fire, I didn't hear thunder, but something stronger than all of that pierced right through me, a presence that didn't ask permission. It invaded my spirit as if it had always lived there long before I did. And then a voice, not like the voices we know, but as if truth itself was being spoken from within me. That voice didn't bring comfort. It brought fear. It carried authority and tenderness at the same time, like a father revealing a secret to his son, knowing it would change his life forever. Enoch, it said, I have chosen you. And before I could ask why, I was overtaken by a feeling I still cannot explain, as if everything made sense, and yet no explanation was necessary. God was speaking to me, not to please me, but to send me I trembled, because being sent by God means being torn out of the ordinary. It means being set apart, misunderstood, even hated. "You will see what the eyes of men cannot bear to see," he said, "and you will write what many will try to erase." In that moment, I realized my life would no longer be mine. And worse, I realized I didn't want it to be. Because once you've truly heard the voice of God, you can never again be satisfied with the silence of the world. He didn't give me easy answers. He gave me orders. He gave me visions. He gave me the responsibility of recording things that were not meant for this time, but would be vital for the time to come. "What you will see will be heavy, but you are not alone," he said. And then, for the first time, I understood that faith is not just believing, it's obeying. Even when you're afraid, even when you don't understand, even when everything inside you screams, "I'm not enough." If you've ever felt like God spoke to you, but what he said scared you, then you'll understand. What I lived, because the true voice of God doesn't soothe you, it transforms you, it turns you inside out, and it calls you to places where only the courageous or the desperate ones say yes. And that day I said yes, not because I was strong, but because I was weak enough to trust someone greater than myself. And it was that yes that led me to the threshold of the invisible. But before I could cross that threshold, there was silence again. God had called me, but he didn't take me right away. He made me wait. And that's where the next chapter of my journey begins. A place where heaven opens, where stars speak, where an angel waits to guide my steps. And if you think you've seen enough, wait until you see what I saw when I stood before the gates of heaven. When the silence returned, it wasn't empty. It was full of something that was watching me. I could feel the weight of heaven hovering over the earth, as if the clouds had lowered just to listen for my next step. That was when I knew the calling wasn't just an instruction. It was a crossing. I didn't feel my feet leave the ground, but when I realized it, I was no longer where the wind touches. Reality seemed to fold like parchment, and my eyes were open to something that could never be described simply. Heaven wasn't just above us. It was all around, alive, pulsing, as if it breathed with the name of God. Uriel appeared before me. He didn't fly, and he didn't emerge from fire. He simply became present like someone who had always been there. His gaze was firm but merciful, as if he carried the weight of every revelation in the world within a quiet soul. "You were called to see, Enoch," he said, and those words weren't spoken. They were felt inside me. When he extended his hand, I hesitated. The fear was real, and my soul knew there would be no return. Still, I stepped forward, because there is a kind of obedience that only awakens when you realize you are surrounded by something infinitely greater than your understanding. We passed through layers of light and shadow, as if each dimension we crossed whispered a different name of God. There was no time there, only reverence, and then we reached the gate, a threshold of glory that cannot be described without betraying the vision. It was made of fire that didn't burn, of wind that didn't blow, and of silence that spoke. The gate of heaven wasn't built to impress the eyes. It was built to humble the heart. And when Uriel said, "Enter," I knew I would not see beauty first. I would see truth. And truth, when it is pure, first destroys the illusions we build to survive. My steps felt like they were sinking into light as I crossed the portal. It was as if the weight of glory demanded something from me that I didn't yet know how to give. I saw creatures I cannot name, structures that looked like prayers sculpted into form, rivers that sang, and a sky within the sky, where everything pointed to an invisible and irresistible presence. "Nothing here is by accident, everything is by order," Uriel said. And I understood that the disorder of the world was not heaven's fault, but the result of our distance from it. Heaven is not far because God rejected us. It is far because we chose to forget. In that crossing, I didn't feel elevated. I felt small, like a single note within a symphony that neither begins nor ends with me. It was in that state that I was prepared for what would come next, because what awaited me was not just contemplation, it was a message of judgment. And to carry it, I needed to understand that the beauty of heaven is inseparable from the justice of God, and his justice is not cold, it is holy. It was necessary that I be broken inside before seeing what had corrupted the earth, and that was the role of the gate. It would not allow anyone to enter whole if they intended to leave transformed. And when Uriel said, "Now prepare to descend," I realized that my calling was darker than I had imagined, because what I was about to see was no longer heaven, but those who had abandoned it, angels who chose to fall, pacts that distorted creation, children who were never meant to exist. And that is where the most haunting part of my story begins, when I saw with my own eyes the fall of the Watchers. Uriel didn't have to explain. The scenery changed, and my spirit understood what my eyes still hesitated to accept. We were descending, not toward the earth I knew, but to a realm where heaven had already been rejected. It felt like walking through a garden devastated from within, where the original light had been stripped away and replaced by a sick and twisted glory. And there they were, the ones who had been created to guard the ways of God, and yet allowed themselves to be seduced by something they could never possess: human love without divine limits. The Watchers, angels with eyes of eternity, but hearts that chose the moment. I saw their silhouettes, tall, glorious, but broken, like monuments trying to hide their cracks with posture. And I heard their voices. They no longer sang praises. They whispered late regrets. They had come down to earth, not as messengers, but as usurpers. They took women as wives, taught enchantments, alchemy, the manipulation of forces God had hidden out of mercy. Their names echoed: Semjaza, Azazel, Amaros. Each name a scar in the heavens, and from them were born the giants, the Nephilim. Hybrid beings violent, with no place in the divine plan. They grew hungry not only for flesh but for dominion. Their steps tore through the ground, their eyes burned with inherited rage. They were not simply genetic mistakes, they were living blasphemies. The earth, once called good, now groaned. Blood fed the roots, fear ruled the seasons, and men, deceived by power, bowed before the children of chaos as if they were gods. As I watched, Uriel revealed to me, they broke the link between heaven and creation, and everything born outside the will of God becomes an instrument of destruction. Then I understood, divine justice is not vengeance, it is restoration. Because those angels didn't just disobey, they taught humanity how to build a world that no longer depended on the Creator. Weapons, sorcery, corrupted astrology. Everything that seemed like wisdom was in truth a return to darkness. But God saw. The corruption didn't go unnoticed. The voice of the blood cried out from the innocent, rising like thunder to the gates of the throne. Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, Uriel, the holy ones responded, and it was decreed. The Watchers would be judged, their children destroyed, their names removed from the heavenly records. I was chosen to write that sentence, not with joy, but with tears, because there is no judgment without pain, no justice without loss, but it had to be done to save what remained, to preserve the original plan. And as I held the celestial pen and heard the names spoken, a weight fell upon me, not because of what God would do, but because of what I would see next, because knowing the rebellion wasn't enough. I had to witness its consequences, and so I was taken to the most heartbreaking vision of all, the day the giants marched upon the earth and devoured everything. They were colossal, not just in stature, but in presence. The Nephilim, born from the forbidden union between the Watchers and the daughters of men, walked the earth as if they were gods. Their footsteps left craters, and wherever they stepped, life pulled back. I saw crops wither in their shadow, rivers bend away from their paths, and animals flee in terror. The earth, which once sang in harmony with heaven, now groaned beneath the weight of its corruption. At first, men worshipped them, captivated by their strength and knowledge, but they soon realized they had created their own executioners. With the giants demanded impossible tributes, and when they were denied, they took by force. I saw entire villages plundered, men crushed like insects, women and children taken as trophies. Famine spread, not from lack, but because the Nephilim consumed everything, leaving only desolation behind. The violence wasn't only physical, it was spiritual. The Nephilim taught men forbidden arts, ancient magic, and rituals that twisted the soul. I saw altars raised in their honor, human sacrifices offered in exchange for favors. Humanity, already distant from God, now plunged into a darkness with no return. And I, witness to it all, felt my heart break with every scene of horror. The earth cried out for justice. Rivers, once sources of life, now ran red with blood. The trees, once dancing to the wind, now bowed in mourning. And heaven, silent, seemed to wait for the right moment to intervene. I knew judgment would come, but I also knew that many innocents would suffer before it arrived. And that tore me apart inside. That's when I heard the voice of God again. It wasn't a command, it was a lament. Enoch, write what you see. Let future generations know the price of disobedience. And I wrote with tears in my eyes and pain in my heart. Every word was an open wound, every sentence a cry of warning. Because what I saw was not just the end of an era, it was the sign of a judgment that would come to restore order. But before justice could be established, there was one last mission for me. The watchers themselves, now filled with regret, came to me. Their voices, once proud, now trembled with desperation. "Intercede for us, Enoch," they pleaded. And so, even knowing the depth of their sins, I agreed to carry their petition before God, because deep down I still believed in divine mercy. And it is about that intercession that I now must speak. When the watchers found me, they were no longer the radiant beings who had once descended from heaven with promises of wisdom and light. They were pale, covered in shame, their eyes a mix of fear and sorrow. I no longer saw glory in them, only ruin. They who had taught men the secrets of the stars and of the sword now trembled like children before the wrath of the Creator. And they asked me for something I wasn't sure I could give. Hope. "Write for us, Enoch," they said. "Ask the Most High to forgive us, to have mercy on our fall." Their voices, once so powerful, were now broken, barely whispers. Their pain was not only for the punishment they knew was coming, but for the eternal separation from the one they once served. They knew they had crossed a line that could never be undone. And yet, there was a plea, a cry. And how could I ignore it? So I withdrew. In silence, I sat beneath the stars, the same sky they had once defied. I wrote with trembling hands and a heavy soul, not just a petition, but a cry. I knew God needed no mediator, but maybe he wanted men and angels alike to understand the weight of their choices. The text I wrote was no excuse. It was a confession. And in every line, I tried to express the sorrow of those who had fallen, but now recognized their misery. I rose into heaven with that scroll in my hands. I don't know how to explain it, but I was brought before the throne. I didn't see a face, I didn't hear words with my ears, but I felt a presence, a holiness that crushed me, a love that was fire and light at the same time. I offered the scroll and waited. The silence that followed was heavier than any word, until finally the answer came, not as redemption, but as justice. "There will be no forgiveness for the watchers," was the answer. Not because God was cruel, but because they had knowingly opened the door to evil. They were not deceived, they were not forced. They transgressed with full understanding. Their actions altered the order of creation, and now creation itself cried out for balance. It was as if the entire universe had waited for this moment, and I was there only as the witness who had to record it, so that no one could ever say they had not been warned. I returned to earth with that sentence in my hands. The fallen angels fell silent when they heard it, and a veil of sorrow came over them. There was no rebellion, only bitter acceptance. They knew their time had come to an end. But as I descended, another vision overtook me. I saw the abyss, a place where light does not enter, where time does not move, where the soul screams without sound. That was where they would go. And that, I saw it up close, and that is what I must speak of now. They took me. I don't know if it was my body or only my soul, but I know I was there, in the place where forgotten souls are kept, where judgment rests like smoldering fire. Uriel guided me, but said nothing. His silence was heavier than any word, and it prepared me for what was to come. We descended through corridors of darkness, where there was no time, no direction. The air felt heavy, as if it were made of condensed sorrow, and the walls, if there were any walls, murmured ancient laments, whispers of souls still waiting. In vain. We reached a deep chamber divided into 4 parts. Uriel explained, here were the dead. In one section, the righteous were at peace, wrapped in soft light, their faces calm, like those who sleep after a long journey. But in the other, 3, there was pain, silent cries, eyes begging to be forgotten, souls who knew exactly why they were there. I saw kings, soldiers, priests, men who had once held power but now were only shadows, waiting for the day when everything would be revealed. There were no masks, only truth. Farther ahead, I saw the abyss. It wasn't just a pit, it was an end, a place where time itself refused to exist. The fire there did not burn like ours, it consumed without light, without heat, only pain, and those who were there were the Watchers. The same ones who had begged me for mercy. Now they were chained. Their eyes reflected the terror of what could not be undone. Uriel told me they would remain there until the day of final judgment, and that even on that day, the sentence would not change. This was justice, not cruelty. But what shook me the most was not what I saw, it was what I felt. God allowed me for a brief moment to experience the weight of judgment. My spiritual body was surrounded by unbearable heat. My mind visited memories I had never lived, as if I had absorbed the screams of every lost generation. I understood what it means to be separated from the source of life. It is not fire that destroys, it is his absence. And as much as I wished to forget what I saw, I know I was marked forever. When I returned to the presence of the angels, my eyes burned with a different light. I was the same, but something new lived inside me, an urgency, a conviction that was not human. What God had shown me was not only to be recorded, it was to be proclaimed, to be warned, to be shouted, even if no one wanted to listen. Judgment is real, and it is coming, and no one will escape divine justice, not even me. The only difference is in who carries the name of the righteous one, and it was there in that dark valley that another vision took hold of me. A brilliant light broke through the darkness, and on the throne lifted above all things sat him, the Son of Man, the one who shines brighter than the sun, whose eyes pierce soul and spirit. And he saw me, and when he saw me, something changed, because even surrounded by justice, there was love in his gaze. And that is what I need to tell you. What I saw before the throne changed everything. I was face down, but not out of fear. It was something deeper, a kind of reverence that cannot be faked. In front of me was the throne, surrounded by rivers of fire that did not consume, only purified. A living light pulsed around it as if every particle in that space was singing. And then I saw him, the Son of Man. He wasn't just a figure. He was the very manifestation of glory. His eyes pierced through everything hidden. His voice wasn't heard with the ears but with the spirit. And when he spoke, the universe seemed to go silent. Around him were thousands of heavenly beings, creatures I could not describe unless I had seen them with my own eyes. Each one sang, but there was no confusion. It was as if every note formed one eternal melody. He raised one hand and then books appeared, living books opening on their own. And in them were recorded the works of every person who had ever walked the earth, every thought, every intention. I saw familiar names. I saw small decisions with eternal consequences. No one was missing. And then, something unexpected. A group approached the throne. They were the righteous, but they were not perfect. They were the broken, the repentant, the ones who had surrendered. I saw their faces lit by his presence, and when the Son of Man called them, their tears became light. They were not recognized for their victories, but for their faith. And he said, "Come, blessed of my Father, receive the kingdom prepared for you." Those words were not just for them. They were for everyone who, like them, still carries hope, even in the midst of darkness. But not everyone rejoiced. Behind them I saw the mighty of the earth, those who had trusted in their empires, their riches, their own names. Now they trembled. Their faces were disfigured, not by fire, but by shame. They tried to hide, but there were no rocks to crawl under. Their mouths were dry, for the only thing left was truth. And before the throne, no lie can stand. I saw kings who had denied God now begging for mercy, but there was no more time. They had learned too late that the throne is real. And while this happened, the heavens announced a new time, a time of restoration, of justice. Creation exhaled like someone who had been waiting for this day since the beginning. And there, before the throne, I understood that everything I had been shown, the fallen angels, the giants, the cries of the earth, all of it pointed to this moment. The moment when the Lamb and the Judge are revealed as one. The moment when every name bows, every heart is exposed, and every destiny is sealed. But there was more, because even in the midst of glory, I was called. The Son of Man looked in my direction and said, "Enoch, write, because what you saw there must be told, and the world must hear before time runs out." And that's when I understood. My calling didn't end there. I would have to return to warn, to testify, and to carry the weight of everything that had been revealed. Even with all that, the throne, the books, the Son of Man, I longed to stay. It was like being in the place we were never meant to leave, where the soul finds rest, where silence carries answers, and light heals memory. But that wasn't where my path ended. An angel called to me and said, "You were not brought here to remain. You were called to witness." And then I felt something inside me, heavier than fear, more real than the vision, the weight of responsibility. I would have to carry to the earth a revelation that not everyone would be willing to hear. The words I was meant to write burned inside me like fire in dry bones. They weren't ideas, they were verdicts. Each revelation was a seed that needed fertile soil. But the world I would return to was hardened, distracted, full of noise, but empty of listening. Still, I received the scroll, and when I touched it, I saw the destiny of nations, the cries of children not yet born, the silence of those who would one day cry out for justice. It wasn't just about what I had seen, it was about what I now carried, a sacred weight, a burden of glory and terror. I was taken back by the same hand that had led me to the gates of heaven. But now there was no awe, only urgency. As I descended through the dimensions, I felt the contrast between the purity I was leaving and the corruption I was returning to. Earth had not changed. Men still chased power. The heavens were still ignored. The righteous were still forgotten. But now I knew too much to remain silent. And as much as I desired eternal rest, there was something more precious than that, fulfilling the will of the one who entrusted me with this mission. I walked once again among men, but I was no longer the same. My eyes had been marked by eternity, my heart shaped by justice. When I spoke, some listened, a few, but they listened. Others mocked, and that hurt more than rejection. Because I knew what was coming. I knew the end of those who would choose silence over truth. And that's why I wrote every word, every vision, every cry, as if my hands were the last bridge between heaven and earth. And if you've come this far with me, you need to know, none of this was meant to be merely heard. It was meant to be felt. The world Enoch saw still stands before us. The forces that rebelled still whisper in the shadows. The line between the visible and invisible still pulses. And time, even when ignored, is still counting down. You may have felt something strange while listening. Maybe a restlessness, maybe a memory. That is not by chance. Because just as I was called, you are being called too, but this story does not end with me. In fact, it's just beginning, because there are others. Others who also saw, who also heard, who also carry something inside of them. And if you want to understand the other side, listen to Mary, or to Judas, or walk with the thief who found grace in his final breath. Each of them holds a part of what heaven is still trying to say. But now, before you move on, there's something you need to see, something that might reignite what has gone out inside you. If all of this touched you, even in silence, maybe you're closer than you think. And maybe without realizing it, you've drifted away from something or someone who is still whispering your name. Because the truth is, it's not enough to know about judgment. You have to recognize the presence that guided me, that spoke to me, that lit the darkness. The same presence that today might be waiting for you to notice it. Never left your side. If you feel like something is missing, like there's still a space between you and God, I want to invite you to start a journey back. Not a theological path, not a religious one, but a personal daily return. That's why I recommend the devotional guide called Your 30 Steps from God. 30 stories, one per day. Like mine, but told by voices you may think you already know. Judas, Mary, Peter, the thief on the cross, and even the Holy Spirit himself. Each one holds a step back home. And if you want to feel what I felt when I was surrounded by the presence of God, the same presence that lifted me from the ground and brought me to the gates of heaven, then you need to hear what comes next. The next video is not about judgment, it's about the Spirit. I am the Holy Spirit, you forgot me. Because the greatest forgetting of our time is not realizing that He's still speaking, still waiting, and still able to set fire to whatever remains inside you. Click the video on the screen, but not just with your eyes, click with your heart.